I do not see China's opening and normalization of relations with China as having been a net debit, a net negative impact for the United States or the West. I don't think that's the case at all. And I think those who argue that China has only gotten to where it is by stealing secrets from the West or from other countries, or that China has only gotten where it is because of American investment in China is ridiculous. China has achieved enormous progress by opening up and by engaging with the West. And the West itself has also benefited enormously through interactions with China, economically and otherwise. The World Bank estimates that 1/3 of global growth since 2008 has been due to China. 1/3 of global growth. You won't see that said by many US government officials. And yet China's impact on many countries in a positive way economically is absolutely undeniable. So there is major benefit that China has had, and engagement has produced major benefits for the United States, for the West, and of course for China. We need to really establish a much more fact-based, much more balanced understanding about China and about the US response to China than we have at present, that's for sure. The United States has moved to an extreme opposite in its assessment of China and its impact on the world, away from what was seen as the overly conciliatory stance of previous administrations, which is in many respects, I think, debatable. But nonetheless, there has been this move away to this opposite pendulum, which is way too extreme and can't be sustained over time. It's going to move back towards the center. There needs to be a more balanced middle ground in understanding what China means for the United States and what the US-China relationship means. First, we need to be reflective on how we look at China. And we have to also do it in the context of American domestic imperatives, because we can't compete effectively with China as long as we have the kinds of problems that we continue to have within the United States in terms of income inequality, in terms of the stagnation in many ways of the middle class, in terms of the failure to invest in infrastructure and research and development in many high-tech areas, and I mean government investment. As long as we have some serious deficiencies in all these areas, we will continue to be less than capable in some respects in competing with China. So I would say a second major aspect of a policy toward China is to understand the importance of the United States improving its domestic situation. And thirdly, I would say that the United States needs to start thinking about what a stable balance of power would look like in the Western Pacific. And this has to begin at home, and then it has to be extended to friends and allies, and only then to the Chinese. There has to be an understanding within American leadership and within and among American allies and friends about where we want to go in the region and where we would like to see the region end up over time. Something that is relatively free, again, of the exclusionary zero-sum types of thinking that so dominate now American thinking. So we have to have a shift in that direction as well. And I think also the United States needs to start really putting a lot of support behind multilateral structures and institutions, the World Trade Organization, some version of a Trans-Pacific Partnership, the RCEP concept, which is moving forward without the United States, as is the TPP at present, climate change, and the importance of strengthening the climate change regime is an absolutely essential objective for the United States. And then arms control and the resistance against further proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and dealing with the Korea issue. We need to establish a clearer roadmap with the Chinese about how we're going to get to a more stable Korean peninsula over time. That again has to be done in tandem with American friends and allies in the area. So in all these areas, the United States needs to start thinking through what its objectives are and how it's going to meaningfully achieve them with a clear understanding of the facts of the matter and the resources available or likely not available to the United States, and the importance of dealing with American friends and allies in all of these areas. I think it requires a broad-based set of initiatives, as I've just said, that the United States, if it doesn't pursue, will have a continued deterioration of the U.S.-China relationship, I believe, and a deterioration of the climate in Asia and most likely beyond. And nobody wants that. I mean, nobody's prepared to back a zero-sum contention between the U.S. and China indefinitely. U.S. allies don't want it. Other countries around the world don't want it. I don't think many Americans want it, and I don't think many Chinese want it. Well, I think the first thing you need to say is that in the United States, there has emerged in the last several years a bipartisan consensus of sorts that China represents a greater challenge or threat than had been previously thought, and that therefore there needs to be more deliberate efforts made, more systematic efforts made to deal with that problem effectively. Now, this judgment, this consensus has within it all kinds of issues that can be challenged or qualified in some ways. I think that the response has been over the top in many kinds of ways, both by Republicans and Democrats, and cries out for a much more sophisticated understanding of the complex nature of China's challenge. But that said, I think that Biden, if he's elected, will probably, despite this consensus, he probably will soften the rhetoric that has been used by the Trump administration with regard to China. He'll work to improve bilateral relations with China where cooperation is clearly required, something that the Trump administration barely acknowledges and really uses as a kind of throwaway line. Oh, well, we'll cooperate where we can, but really we have to focus on the fact that China is threatening us. But I think Biden will recognize that that's an inadequate stance to take, that there needs to be a more significant basis for cooperation established between the two countries, given the major challenges that they both face in a variety of different venues and arenas: climate change, pandemics, the global financial order, counterterrorism, WMD, non-proliferation, etc. I mean, there are many issues over which China and the United States must cooperate. And I think a Biden administration will recognize that. It'll also, I think, stop alienating America's friends and allies and will listen more to them rather than lecturing them and trying to tell them what they should be doing in response to China, as Secretary of State Pompeo seems to do on a very frequent basis. Now, if he really listens to what others say, I think Biden will step away from the zero-sum demonizing that has dominated the Trump era towards China and start developing more balanced policies that place limits on rivalry, strengthens the U.S. capacity to compete, develops more clearly and narrowly defined tools for defending U.S. interests regarding China, and build multilateral structures for cooperating and dealing with their economic and their financial and other differences. Well, I think that if Trump is reelected, he gives every sign of continuing with his current chaotic, zero-sum, worst-case policies that are designed really to restrain Chinese development and to decouple the two economies and technology spheres. This will more likely result in the U.S. isolating itself, I think, given the dense and deepening economic and technological linkages between China and many other countries, and the fact that these countries ultimately don't show much inclination of a desire to decouple from China and to contain Chinese development the way the United States, the way the Trump administration is arguing. There needs to be some clear limits, for sure, on U.S., Western, and Chinese interactions in specific areas. I think that is definitely called for. But this idea of decoupling, this idea of bringing all of American companies back to the U.S., this idea of cutting off technology with China is both, I think, quixotic, and I think it's also counterproductive, and it undermines the interests of the United States in maintaining its technological prowess and in maintaining its economic development and in maintaining workable relations with the People's Republic of China.